Hi, I'm Tim Phillips at Phillips and Company Advisors. Everything we do is built around one idea, helping you build not just wealth, but confidence, clarity, and long-term financial strength. Because the truth is, success with money isn't about spreadsheets alone. It's about behavior, patience, and perspective. That's why I'm excited to introduce our friend Morgan Housel, best-selling author of Psychology of Money. Morgan is one of the most thoughtful voices in finance. He brings stories, history, and human behavior together in a way that makes complicated ideas simple and powerful. Morgan, thanks for being here and take it away.
Hey everyone, I'm Morgan Housel, back with another video for Phillips and Company. Thanks again for letting me do this. And what I want to talk about today is the concept of using money as a tool to live a better life versus a yardstick of status to measure yourself against others by. Now, someone told me this idea a couple of years ago, and it really stuck with me. They said, a high-end Toyota is a nicer car than an entry-level BMW. Now, leave aside that that is subjective, but the basic idea here is that the high-end Toyota is filled with luxuries that make driving better for you. It has nice cushy seats, it has a moonroof, it has a good sound system, whatever it might be, they're for you. They're not to impress other people. The entry-level BMW, on the other hand, is largely about status. It's not necessarily a nice car for you. It has entry-level seats and an entry-level sound system. By and large, what you're doing that for is to show other people, hey, look at me, I'm driving a BMW. Buying one of them, the high-end Toyota, is making your life better, making your life more comfortable. It has a lot of utility for you. The other is mostly about signaling to other people. Now, I'm not all the way against signaling and status. Signaling to others what your values are and what you've accomplished in life is important and fundamental and unavoidable in a world when you're trying to cooperate with other people. But I often think about this mental exercise for myself and my own family. If nobody were watching, if nobody could see my car, my house, my clothes, if nobody could see where I went on vacation, if my entire life was invisible to everybody else except my family, how would I choose to live? What kind of car would I want to drive? What kind of house would I want to live in if nobody else could ever see what those things were? If there was no sense of embarrassment, no sense of pride, it was just pure utility. I think in that world, you would instantly understand, when you imagine that world, the difference between utility and status. Because in that abandoned, stranded island where no one can see you mental exercise, you immediately drift towards utility. And so would you want an entry-level BMW? Of course not. You would want the high-end Toyota, just using that as an example, the utility versus status. Now, one of the reasons this is so important is that a lot of people understand as they age how few people are actually looking at you. I heard this framing from the great comedian Jimmy Carr. He said, in your 20s, most people worry about what people think of you. In your 30s, you say, I don't care what anybody thinks of me. And in your 40s, you finally realize the truth, which was that nobody was thinking about you all along. Now, examples of people using their money for utility versus status are some of the most interesting that I've come across in money. And sometimes to really wrap your head around these, you have to go to the extreme examples and then try to apply those lessons back to yourself. And I'll give you one of my favorite examples of this. There's an entrepreneur named Chuck Feeney. He died a couple years ago. Chuck Feeney started the duty-free stores that are in every international airport. Just before you go through customs, you go through a duty-free store and you can buy like a gallon of tequila and a carton of cigarettes and not pay any tax on it. You're probably familiar with those. Phenomenal, unbelievable business. And Chuck Feeney made a fortune for himself. Over the course of his career as an entrepreneur doing that, he made about $10 billion for himself, starting in about the 1980s. Now, the well-known part of Chuck Feeney's story that has been written about and reported about quite a bit is that he was probably the world's most frugal billionaire. He gave away 99.9% of his money to charity. He took out 2 million with an M out of his 10 billion and lived a very simple Spartan life. Lived in a small basic apartment, flew coach, lived an ordinary life, gave away about $10 billion. That's the well-known part of Chuck Feeney's story. The less well-known part that I think is the really fascinating part is when Chuck Feeney became a billionaire back in the 1980s, He lived like a proper billionaire that you would imagine. He had a yacht, he had mansions all over the world, he had a private jet, and he realized over time that that was not the life that he necessarily wanted. He had this quote that I love. He said, "I realized one day that I was happy when I was giving money away, and I was not happy when I was not giving money away." And so he abandoned that life that he was supposed to live, and he did what made him happy. Now, the lesson there, I think this is really important, is not that I think he did an amazing thing because he lived a frugal life. I actually think he lived far too frugally. He could have had a better life if he loosened up a little bit. What I love about what he did is that he didn't care what anyone else thought about his lifestyle. He did what made him happy. Regardless of the optics or the view or what anyone else thought about it, he lived his best life. And I think there are far more stories of people chasing a life that doesn't necessarily make them happy, but they think it's what they should do because they're not using money as a tool to live a better life. They're using it as a yardstick of status for the pursuit of the attention and the admiration of other people. Roughly 100 years ago, Harvey Firestone, who started Firestone Tires, wrote in his biography something that he noticed among himself and all of his wealthy friends. He said, "The first thing that people do when they become wealthy is they buy a gigantic house." And he said every single person that he knows, including himself, considers it nothing more than a burden. So they have these gigantic mansions, and if you're one of those people, maybe you can relate to this, the upkeep and the hassle of it is off the charts. And so Harvey Firestone was pondering this, and he said, why do we do it if it doesn't necessarily make us happy? And he kind of had two answers for that. One was, it was not about the utility. Having 17 bedrooms is not more utility than one. You can only sleep in one of them at a time. It was almost entirely about status. And again, I don't want to poo-poo that because that is a very important thing of how humans work. We can't all just say, be like Chuck Feeney and live in the one-room apartment. That's not the point here. The point is they were doing things that explicitly made them less happy for the pursuit of status. The second point that Firestone brought up that I thought was really interesting is he said, why don't we go back? If we were happier in the smaller house, why don't we do it? And he had this fascinating line. He said, there is no going back except as a broken man. As in, like, once you reach that level of status and that social group and that lifestyle, you can't go back. Now, Chuck Feeney did. He is the rare bird in that, but I thought that was a very interesting line. There is no going back except as a broken man. And it makes me think about the lifestyle that I want to live, the goals that I have, what I want to pursue, knowing how difficult it is to go in reverse. Now, I have my own kind of version of this as a writer. It's what I've always called selfish writing, which is that I want to write for an audience of one, which is me. I want to write stories and talk about stories like I'm doing now that I think are interesting in a way that I would find compelling around topics that I'm interested in myself. And then I kind of take a leap of faith that maybe other people will as well. But what I never want to do is set out and say, what are other people interested in? What stories will other people like? That is chasing their goal rather than my own. And whether it is the work that you're doing or the goals that you're pursuing, you're always going to do better and gain more enjoyment when you're doing it for yourself rather than trying to perform for other people. And so this is all pretty simple and pretty basic, but it's very important because it's so easy to overlook. And when I try to think about my own spending decisions, and not just day-to-day spending decisions, but my goals, what do I actually want out of money? I always try to ask myself and to remind myself, am I doing this and do I want this for utility or for status? And when you realize kind of what I think is a futile game of a lot of status-seeking endeavors and how much pleasure there can be out of building a life out of things that you truly enjoy and are doing for yourself, a lot of those questions about how to spend our money and what our goals should be come into a clearer view.